Captain Midnight.
Of all the upcoming Star Wars films, I have to say, The Last Jedi is easily the one I'm looking forward to the most. With a Han Solo movie in seeming disarray and now being directed by Ron Howard, the directorial equivalent of Wonder Bread, and Episode 9 being in the hands of the guy who made what is pretty easily the worst movie of 2017 in my opinion, I'm a little worried about the franchise. But Rian Johnson's Episode 8 seems to be coming together nicely, and the trailers definitely have me on board. But as we've seen in the past, pulling off a great Star Wars movie is a lot harder than it might look. So here are my suggestions for what I'd like to see them do in The Last Jedi. Feel free to share your own suggestions in the comments below. Number 5. Stop pandering to nostalgia. It's pretty obvious to everyone that there is a lot of money to be made in nostalgia. I'm not going to get into complaining about how many movies are remakes, reboots, and sequels these days, because, come on, that's pretty well-worn territory. I don't think there's anything really wrong with reboots and sequels, as long as they bring something new to the table. And in my opinion, Force Awakens did just that. And yes, I know the basic outline of the story was lifted from A New Hope, but the new cast members were fun and likable additions. And I think Kylo Ren is actually pretty interesting. There's a lot of great stuff that they could do with that character. But both Force Awakens and Rogue One leaned really hard on nostalgia. Remember when the Millennium Falcon turned up in Episode 7 and everyone in the theater cheered? That made sense. I mean, it was exciting and people loved the Millennium Falcon. And it really hadn't been seen in a movie since 1983. But here's the thing. You can only really do that once. You can't count on the iconic aspects of the series to carry new movies forever. Once the Falcon, stormtroopers, lightsabers, and all the other iconic imagery are turning up in new movies every single year, the initial novelty and excitement of them is going to wear off. And if you want people to continue to be invested in the franchise, you can't stagnate. Great new characters and creatures are a must. Force Awakens did this reasonably well, I think. But like many things in that movie, the new stuff felt a little bit too derivative of the original movie. I'd like to see Johnson and company take bigger risks in The Last Jedi and create something truly unexpected. The Force Awakens was the first Star Wars movie in years, and it needed to win people back after the prequels. But The Last Jedi will be the third film in the franchise in as many years. And that's a great time to take risks and create something completely new. Point is, please do not let it devolve into a retread of Empire Strikes Back. Number 4. Give Poe the spotlight. Almost every role I've seen him in, from Inside Llewyn Davis's narcissistic folk singer to Show Me a Hero's tragic mayor, and of course the tech mogul you love to hate in Ex Machina, has proved that Oscar Isaac is one of his generation's best actors. And it's pretty exciting to have him in the Star Wars universe. In Force Awakens, he was able to take a role that, let's admit, wasn't really that interesting on paper, and turn it into a pretty memorable performance. But I still feel like he was underutilized. I would love to see The Last Jedi give Poe Dameron a lot more to do. And with the sad, unexpected death of Carrie Fisher last year, General Leia is understandably going to have to take a backseat in Episodes 8 and 9. Whether they'll have the character die or simply keep her off screen, someone is going to have to be the new face of the Resistance going forward. And Poe seems like the most obvious candidate for the job. Whatever they decide to do with him though, I hope it takes full advantage of Isaac's range, and gives him a lot more dramatic heavy lifting than Force Awakens did. Number 3. Put Rey and Finn through the ringer. The middle chapter of a trilogy tends to be the darkest. It just makes sense on a narrative level. The beginning of the story, traditionally, is where we meet our hero, set up the stakes, and send them on their journey. These tend to be lighter than future chapters because, minus a charred elderly couple or two, the characters are taken out of their comfort zones, but we have yet to really put them to the test. And obviously, the final chapter is where things wrap up. Good defeats evil, everyone hands out medals and reflects on their journey and what they've gained and lost along the way, and the audience goes home satisfied. The middle chapters, though, those are a little more nebulous, because they're usually the lowest point for our protagonists. Generally, things look worse for them at the end of the middle chapter than at the beginning. Again, I'm speaking in very broad terms here. But I think the point stands that the midpoint of a story is generally where our heroes should be at their lowest. So it only makes sense to really put Rey and Finn through the ringer in The Last Jedi. As much as Force Awakens tried to sell it, I just don't buy Han Solo's death as this tragic, defining event in Rey and Finn's lives. Let's face it, this is some old guy that, yes, they probably liked and respected, but also that they basically just met, which I think is why Leia and Rey hugging at the end just struck a false chord with a lot of people. It didn't feel earned in a way that it maybe should have. Let's take a look at the easiest example I could choose, The Empire Strikes Back. Look at how Luke and Han started that movie and where they are by the end. Luke ended New Hope as a hero. I mean, he saved the galaxy. Han Solo found his inner hero too, and is a reluctant leader in the rebellion. By the end of Empire, though, Luke was not only missing a limb, he had his entire view of the world torn to shreds, discovering that his mentor lied to him, and that his heroic father was actually the guy he was fighting this whole time. And Han had his close friend betray him, and ends the movie as a glorified popsicle about to get sold off to a giant slug. So yeah, things are not going so great for the pair. The stakes have gotten higher and more personal for them, and as much as I don't want The Last Jedi to reuse the story of Empire, I think it would be smart for the filmmakers to escalate the stakes in a similar way. Rey and Finn had an exciting call to adventure in The Force Awakens, but now it's time for them to face some harsher challenges. Number 2. Follow Kylo Ren's dark descent. There's this thing that happens a lot with J.J. Abrams' work where I tend to walk out of the theater loving them, but the more I think about them and the actual details of the plot, the less they hold up. There was an element of that with The Force Awakens too, but Kylo Ren is the rare instance where the opposite actually happened. The more I think about the character of Ben Solo and the arc that they've set up for him, the more I like it. Abrams and Disney knew that another Sith character would just come off as a wannabe Darth Vader, so they leaned into that and created a character that literally wants to be Darth Vader. Everything that annoyed some people about the character, his immaturity and the fact that he pretty much sucks at lightsaber fighting, is what I liked about him in Episode 7. He's a young guy that's kind of play acting at being Darth Vader, but he wasn't really anywhere close to the real thing yet. But now he's murdered his own father, and that's not really an easy thing to come back from. Maybe he'll be redeemed at the end of the trilogy, and maybe he won't. But either way, I see things getting a lot worse for him before they get better. Episode 8 has so much they could do with the character. He's now someone who's really chosen his side, and after his defeat at the hands of Rey and Finn, has more to prove to his creepy, Gollum-looking boss than ever. I hope to see Kylo Ren be more disciplined, more tortured, and more monstrous than ever in The Last Jedi. Number 1. Question the Jedi. The thing that stood out to me, and I'm guessing most viewers when watching The Last Jedi trailer, was Luke's line about the Jedis needing to end. It's an interesting character turn. Luke Skywalker, the savior of the galaxy, hates Jedis now? Like, Luke will be all grumpy at first, but by the end of the film he'll be back on board fighting alongside Rey and the gang. That probably wouldn't be terrible or anything, but a Star Wars film that takes a more morally ambiguous view of the Jedis could be pretty interesting. Like, okay, to demonstrate what I mean, let's do a short thought experiment. Pretend you've never heard of Star Wars and judge what I'm describing on its own terms. Okay, so there's this ancient religious order, right? And they all work together with the government to unilaterally destroy anything they deem as evil. Except they aren't elected by anyone, and they're very mysterious and secretive. They all dress the same, seem mostly emotionless, and forbid love as a distraction from their main calling, which, to the outside observer at least, appears to be cutting people in half with laser swords. Like, the Jedi Council seems a little less friendly now, right? Now, I'm sure that there's 1,000,001 books and comics that fans could point to make the case that the Jedis were wise and just in doing all of this. But honestly, most of that stuff isn't canon anymore anyway. I'm not saying that the Jedi were evil, but I am saying that when you apply more thought to them than the usual good versus evil logic of Star Wars, they don't seem all that morally pure or great. I mean, seriously, not to harp on the prequels too much, that's very, very well-trodden territory. But do you like any of these guys? Yoda, maybe, but only because of how great he was in the original trilogy? Oh, and Kit Fisto, because his name is Kit Fisto? Come on, admit it. These guys sucked. Okay, I'm getting off track. My point is, even in the most generous reading of the prequels, the Jedi Council looked like a bunch of well-intentioned fools who let the most evil guy in the galaxy rise to power right under their nose. So yeah, they were a flawed organization. It would be really interesting to see The Last Jedi acknowledge that in a way that Star Wars has never really done before. Have Luke point out the flaws in the way that the Jedis used to do things, and maybe create a new Jedi Order that rejects that old way. It would be a risk to shake up the old Sith bad, Jedi good way of seeing things that we're so used to seeing in these movies. But if done well, it could really take the franchise in a fresh and interesting direction.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes.